This is Sunday, and it's free to enter the park and the zoo. The road down there is the zoo. I've just been wandering. I'm actually going to the Museo de Nacional Antropología, the National Anthropology Museum. I don't know what this is in here. This road, there are several roads like this that go through the park, beautifully done, beautifully maintained. And on a day like Sunday, when the world shows up here, there are just infinite, apparently, a number of these little mobile shops that people set up, selling anything and everything from food to gewgaws, mostly those kind of things that will appeal to kids, of course. This is Lago de Chapultepec. You'll probably hear that pronounced different ways by me. This is quiet and serene on this side. Looks like there's some kind of a platform there for some kind of entertainment. On the hill is the castle, and it looks rather large and extravagant from here, but I'll go see that later today. Now I'll pan across that calzada, causeway, and there you'll see in the distance various kinds of watercraft that you can rent and go paddling on Lago de Chapultepec. Chapultepec means grasshopper. The green water, which has the look of our Jackson Lake pollen in the spring, may be the same reason, same source of green. It looks like much of this has been sculpted, although it may be natural. It looks like there are beaches over on that side. I'll just pan this grand plaza, if you will, inside of the Museum of Anthropology. The base of the central column has a jaguar on the right and an eagle on the left, symbols of the major deities of Mexico religious history. Then the sword of conquest going through the center of the sun and into the bottom of the Saba tree. And at the top of the Saba tree is a man and a woman reflecting the duality of life in many ways. And at the very top, an eagle, which is one of the prime symbols of Mexico. Actually, its symbol seems to be a combination of the serpent, which comes from the ground up into the human, and the eagle on top. The eagle consuming a serpent was one of the myths centering the early religious culture and the present-day philosophy on the Templo Mayor that I visited in Mexico City yesterday. This is a painting that depicts the way of life of the early Aboriginal peoples. Principally hunters and gatherers, but I'll focus on a couple of things that are interesting. The use of the atl, which actually was a pre-bow and arrow era. Here are some obsidian workers, the Metat, carvers, and pottery making. It points out that for these people, clothes were not so as important as was body painting. Ceramics was definitely a sedentary evolution Ceramics was a technology developed after sedentary communities, and the fish and the duck illustrate the ability of these people to realistically portray their environment. Here's a pretty little armadillo vessel. What its purpose was, of course, no one knows. Can't tell whether this is a sleeping mouse or chipmunk or dead one with his feet tied together. The shapes are elegantly beautiful. This reminds me of an 18th century brass tub, a ceramic tub. Perhaps reminiscent of some kind of squash gourd. Notice the turtle, you can see his legs sticking out the back. This round container seems interesting in that it has incised markings and raised areas, and it uses paint. It seems to have a slight outward thrust as the wall moves up the side. You wonder what rare condiments or whatever would have been kept in these little vessels. Examples of early textiles, the remains of. And perhaps implements for making them. Here's some fine cloth. The acrobat. Various masks. This one looks like a monkey. This vessel is curious because the face seems more oriental. Miniature acrobats. These are interesting. First time I've seen them. They look like devices for reproducing designs. This one almost like a roller that a woman uses to roll out dough or pastry. And does that fall within the definition of printing? Many of these are interesting because of their playful, whimsical look. No doubt they reflect something more important than that. Another acrobat or clown, but why so fat? Is this whimsical, or were Siamese twins somehow revered, or at least noticed? amazing headdress or hat, if the one were attempted to be worn in real life. Again, fertility icons. Is that perhaps the head of a sacrificial victim? The second tape continued in the Museum of Anthropology at Boston. Sort of wording suggests that in the main, figurines like this are women, generally nude, except for elaborate hairstyles, suggesting that that was the cultural norm. These are burials were excavated in the town of Tlaquico, Mexico, and they illustrate, we'll focus on just this one, various vessels and other elements of perhaps that person's life that were important to them or symbolic. This is particularly interesting for the Serpent sculpture. Apparently there were also dental mutilations for some reason. Looks like the kind of decorative piece there, unless that's a bone. A couple of bowls, maybe the idea of caring for the afterlife. Notice how burials overlaid other burials, and not necessarily any precise order. Almost all of these burial sites contain bowls or vessels from fluids of some sort. Here, this in the lower left seems to be disassociated with the rest of the skeleton, but that there's a bowl underneath. Part of the skeleton remains. And this burial here, inundated with bowls and vessels of some sort. There, if you look close, you can make out the beads that would have formed some necklace important to the owner. And here, a symbolic figurine. This map evidences the area of exchange of goods or trade for the central area up in the upper left of Teotihuacan during the pre-classic period. And from these areas they obtained various raw materials, but one of the most important were seashells and other kinds of marine artifacts that were very symbolic of life and the origin of life. And much of these items that we'll pass by now were gained in that kind of exchange. And of course that included the exchange of ideas, no doubt concepts of art and art design, as well as subtle religious philosophies that we're unable to understand. Could this be a boomerang? The remnants of finely carved shells. The iron pyrites used in their statues, as we saw yesterday at the Museo de Templo in Mexico City, were apparently imported. The pyrites used for eyes, to make eyes sparkle and glisten. Almost unisex designs, although it could very easily be interpreted as female. Notice the somewhat simple and utilitarian look of these pots. They're an interesting square one. A much more recent period that's not defined by the date. This is a cocina or kitchen. Kind of baking and wood stove. The maytap. And yet made out of this wood. I wonder how authentic that is. Certainly the wood isn't, it's all milled. But perhaps that is. This almost looks oriental in design. Classic baking oven. I don't remember seeing anything like this in the United States history, but it's all throughout Latin America and South America. Beautifully carved door. This is the representation of the god Cujito, or the fire god, who's carrying, always depicted as hunched over, carrying a brazier on his back. And it's felt that this might be an allusion to the volcanic eruptions that occurred frequently and plagued this culture, along with earthquakes and floods. This map illustrates the development of ceremonial centers between the period 600 BC and 100 AC. It's interesting that the interpretive sign in English reads this way: the social structure suffered important transformations. Religion was institutionalized as the integrating nucleus, and the priest was placed in front of the community. He was also the mediator before the gods. Just to make sure that we give cannibalism its due, since it's been alleged in Anasazi also, the evidence is in the bones, and apparently, although I can't see it, various cuts, marks on the bones would indicate the disfleshing and dismemberment of individuals. Again, there is so much in a museum of this caliber and size that I just look for the interesting, the novel. This curious looks like an egg poacher. This vessel depicts an early version of the god of Tlaloc, the divinity of the god of rain and fertility. Notice the fangs. He apparently has a nose ring suspended, although I can't make it out too easily. Although on this accompanying vessel, that may be that large lip-looking thing around his mouth. Again, these figures are interesting. What is the hole in the center, and why the spread leg formation? Unless it just allowed the artist the easy way of supporting it. But then it's abandoned if that's the concept in this one. This statue of an acrobat is Olmec in culture, and were used, as were acrobats and dancers, in religious ceremonies. How curious. By way of note, with regard to the Pyramid of the Sun, that faces west as a tribute to the sun and proof of its purpose. There's a cave underneath it, which is symbolic of origin and the home of gods. children's skeletons discovered at the corners of all sides is evidence of a cult of children sacrificed to the storm god. That summarizes with the statement that the first melding of the symbols and beliefs that were to evolve and endure in the central Mexican plateau until the Spanish conquest were embodied in the Pyramid of the Sun. Not seen these before on the right, carvings of humans in obsidian. This was the representation of the jaguar. And these are all representations, carved representations of the serpent jaguar combination. But notice these circles. And remember that in the building Roja, seen at the end of the tour I made in the Templo in Mexico City, had carved circles. Did they reflect the eyes of the jaguar?
Se llama así porque los aztecas encontraron aquí muchos muertos. La parte sur se llama Ciudadela porque los españoles creían que eso era una fortaleza. Tiene una declinación de norte a sur de 30 metros, necesaria para el drenaje. A causa de esta declinación, cuando está uno... Es la serpiente emplumada.
These are braceros, B-R-A-C-E-R-O-S, braceros, used in funerary. You can still see remnants of paint on them. They must have been beautifully painted in great detail. This one apparently held incense. Perhaps dancers? And here's some very tiny figurines. These two are interesting because they attempt to show something on the inside of the person. Notice the faded colors on this figurine. How pretty it might have been when new. Representations of elaborate feather headdresses. This is a large-scale model of Teotihuacan. This is the pyramid of the moon, Piramide de Luna. And I think this calzada or road that goes down here is more than a mile long. That is the Pyramid of the Sun. This gives you an idea of the dimensions of all of it. And down there, the Ciudadela. That's my American version of Spanish. This is the representation of the goddess of water. It's composed of 6 rectangular layers which reflect the architectural structure of Teotihuacan. The hole in the center, of course, held a valuable or unique stone. She was considered to be the companion of Tlaloc. This is a recreation of the 200 individuals who were sacrificed at the opening of the inauguration, if you will, of the Temple of the Sun. Here, of course, there are only a few, and it's argued that there are not even that many, but there are some things to notice here. Notice the different sets of teeth surrounding the skulls. And while you may or may not be able to notice, the hands cross behind the body, indicating that they were tied. Don't know the significance of the arrowheads. And notice that they were buried with elaborate necklaces. It's interesting that the knees all seem to face the same direction. Okay, by way of note, this was burial number 5, located at the rear or east side of the Temple of the Plumed Serpent. 9 individuals, hands tied behind their back, necklaces made of human jawbones, and slate discs placed at the site of the coccyx, which I can't see. Here it suggests that the storm god was the prime deity at Teotihuacan and may have formed with its similar traits the precursor of the Mexica god Tlac. It's the largest flute that I've seen. It'd be fascinating to know how this music sounds, how this instrument sounds, and the music it can make. These vessels are decorated by putting a thin layer of plaster over them and then painting the plaster in very vibrant colors. And the designs used were often those to decorate the palaces themselves. These braziers were in the motif of the butterfly. This is the god of spring, who effected with that false skin the capacity to shed his skin and rebirth. Unable to understand, without considerable study, the symbology of these panels, we can only admire the color. A beautiful vest made out of probably seashell, but I can't be sure. And then mica and specific shells. These huge statues were Toltecs, who came after those who built Teotihuacan. They were militaristic, which is apparently reflected in these statues and in their architecture. They believed that when they died, they became butterflies. This is a reproduction model of the ball court.
Mira cómo jugaban las pelotas.
Este es el fútbol revolucionario, ¿verdad?
Luego le podemos poner así. También hay que llevar un lugar en forma de un turista de la
C'est ce qui manquera, c'est ce côté-là.
Una charola que tenía las velas dentro. Mira cómo se cambian de los dos para pegar.
Por eso ponemos
Por eso está la canchecita. Porque va a
Eso que no se ponían a jugar así porque así.
Not much of a hole to hit. Probably half or a third the size of our basketball. Oops. This is the reflection pool and beautiful sun with probably 100 or more turtles. Quite used to the kids. Painted turtles, and I think maybe a box turtle over there. Representations of the jaguar. Some very ancient form of sculpture. A large bracero. Here are two atlatls. The one on the right, the longest, very elaborately carved and decorated, perhaps as a serpent. Those look like they would have a dual ability to chop off a head. This is the sacrificial stone of the Mexica, a society that justified its existence and its sacrifice and its expansion in order to get sacrificial victims on its obedience to the sun god. It's interesting that this seems analogous to the Roman friezes, in only this being in circular form, depicting battles, etc., etc. Another example of what the top of a temple might have looked like. Sacrificial skulls on display, all stripped of flesh. These are supposedly insects of the aquatic insects. Insectos aquaticos, but I don't recognize them. Tortuga. Dugout canoe. Still another model of Templo Mayor in Mexico City. This is interesting just because it is a spiral seen in Anasazi and probably all over the world in wall paintings. This beautiful for its paint. Although it almost looks like it's the ceramic finish with corn, maybe panes. It's the first time I've seen pipes and interesting designs. Another. Apparently a typical mercado or marketplace in the town of Tlatelolco. Not altogether different from what I've seen in many South American countries. Tremendous piles of produce.
También tenemos que ir al Templo.
Están los palos.
Bueno, ellos no vendían.
Trueque, ¿no?
Original textile.
Mira, Peris, ven. En la rodanera.
These figurines have to do with babies and children and motherhood.
이런 게 지금 발굴해가지고 예예 신통했던 그렇죠.
These are plaques that were probably meant to be displayed as they are right now, unless they were embedded in a wall. What purpose specifically they form, I can't determine. I can't determine what this is, but my guess is it's the back end of a serpent. Because of its massive size, probably had something to do with memorializing corn, maize. Don't think it was just for storage. Too big for that. Might have been. There's a hole on the inside that would appear to exit out the bottom. 4 large braceros. Yeah, you can imagine how brilliant they would have looked, how spectacular when they were painted. You can see where the colors were and what they were. On this one in particular. Notice the corn in his left hand. depictions of Conejo, the rabbit. Notice the two snakes entwined around this god deity effigy. These are altars. They're a round altar. Perhaps a serpent's teeth up on top. Here a skull. Hands above the skull. Looks like a whole skirt of intertwined serpents. This is the sunstone, also known as the Aztec calendar, perhaps the most profound and revered artifact of the Aztec culture. This is what was discovered, I think it was in 1987, by some electricians working at the Grand Temple in Mexico City. This is the original. That is the sun in the center. And he is presumably surrounded by two fire serpents, but I don't know if those are inside the circle where his head is or elsewhere. Again, this personifies the complex symbology in all of this Aztec and even the Mayan culture. By way of note, this is a large gladiatorial sacrificial altar, whatever that means. Apparently used to stage the fights between warriors in that, whatever that ceremony is. Focusing on his face, his tongue has been transformed into a sacrificial knife, and to the sides you see two hearts that he's holding in his hands. This is a fire serpent, revered because it followed the sun or helped it across the heaven. The fire serpent was also the weapon of Tlaloc. Another sacrificial stone. You can see the sharp points which allude to the sun disk, but in what way, who knows. Notice the detailed iconography along the top. Notice here the man on the left is grabbing the hair of the man on the right, presumably to decapitate him. The same scene seems to be repeated over and over again with slight differences. This is interesting, if for no other reason it's rendered in wood. Seen later in the day.
Vamos a chocar y te vas a pegar.
Now it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. Sun's out. So are the 20,000 plus or minus people that come here on a Sunday.
Mira esa. ¡Ah, sí es cierto! ¿Qué cosa? Mira, acá. ¡Allá hay otra! Vamos a tomar una foto. Ven, modélale. Mira, acá está. Aquí está atrásito. Miren, aquí atrásito está.
This is one of the great symbolic statues of Mexico in Mexico City, and that is of the eagle on the cactus eating the snake, which signaled for the Mexicas the center of the universe for them. It's also more than poignant that here in this garden of the community, in the center of the community, is corn growing, because corn is so critical to all of Latin America and originated here. Nacional from the opposite direction. It's up in that area there that the President of Mexico lives. There's a major redo of this little portion of this street. Actually, looks like it's going all the way down, radiating off of Zocalo. And as you might imagine, intense amount of individual human labor. Although way in the background, down a couple of streets, is the tip of a backhoe. And these will form the curbs, apparently. You'll see in a moment. Leveling, but I don't even see a level. Banco de Mexico. I was walking by and feeling hungry. Yo tengo hambre. Yo tengo hambre. Yo tengo hambre. And I turned around and came back to have some food at this little stand where my friends, Senora, helped me to get a taco with beef. And what's interesting here is so many things come from this little